Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Afrin Rajai, and today we are going to talk about cognitive behavioral family therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy itself was developed by Aaron Beck back in 60s, and then after that, many other approaches they were kind of like expanded from CBT. Many other therapies they have been working on it, and it's basically a very research-driven approach, and all the other approaches and kind of like options of therapy that came from it, they are also very research-driven. So basically, you can consider CBT itself as a tree, and then this tree has different fruits, and all these different approaches that we have as CBFT are different, sort of like expanded versions of CBT. So we have behavioral couple and family therapists, we have cognitive behavioral couple and family therapy, we have integrative behavioral couples therapy, we have Gottman method couples therapy, and we have mindfulness-based therapies. So as you may see here, all these different approaches, some of them they are like more cognitive based, some of them they are more kind of like behavioral based, and some of them are a combination of them, sort of like in balance. We're going to talk about some of them here today. As you may recall, we learned about this cognitive triangle in CBT. So today we know that there's this relationships and kind of like interactions between or among thoughts, behavior, and feelings, right? Like the triangle that you are seeing. But CBT is more really focused on thoughts and behaviors and how changing in those two things or two aspects would result in having different feelings in a person, in a family. Then the process in CBFT is really, similar to what we have in CBT. So when we are working with clients and families, we need to do the assessment. We need to target the behavior or thoughts that we want to change, and then educate clients, and then help them replace that sort of thought or behavior, and then help them retain what they have done so far, right? So if you remember the cycle of change, which is the picture that you see on the right side, usually clients, when they come to therapy, they are in the contemplation kind of like a stage or preparation, right? Like we can have some clients in pre-contemplation stage, but usually they come to therapy with some sort of force. Either it was like mandatory, or they're a teenager and they come with their parents, or stuff like that. But most of the time we have clients or families who are in the contemplation and preparation stage. And that is when, based on the process that you see on the left, the assessment happens, right? And then we target the behaviors and the thoughts that we want to change. Then in action, then we educate clients or families in how they can replace those thoughts, or what kind of things they can do to help them to challenge those behaviors and thoughts or behaviors in themselves, right? Then we go to the action stage, which is about replacement, right? So then clients, they do these different things to replace another behavior thought with what they had before. And then it's maintenance, which is about retaining, what they have done so far, and if like it's working, and how they can maintain that in their everyday life. Of course, the cycle of change also includes relapse, and the rest of it that you see in the picture. In CBT and CBFT, family therapist is really the educator and the expert in the session. So the therapist has this expert position, which is really rare. If you recall, other approaches that we have learned and we have talked about here, it's really rare to have this sort of position, the expert position for a therapist in the family therapy world. But in CBT and CBFT, the role of the therapist is that educated and that expert, right? The other aspects of or kind of like component of CBFT is that in CBT and also CBFT, empathy is a sort of technique that the therapists use to make the rapport, and it's very, very different from, again, like other approaches, because in other approaches, empathy is usually therapeutic itself, or it's a part of change, right? It's a part of the process. But in CBT, it is not that. It's a technique, it's a sort of intervention that therapists use to make their rapport with the client so they can facilitate the change in therapy and, achieve the goals. And because of that, as it sounds, there are a lot of different written contracts that therapists they make and, they sign with the client. So they be very clear about all these different, policies, goals, rules that they have. A lot of family therapists, they use CBT and CBFT in parenting and in working with actually parents and their children. Because of its unique technique, process, and interventions based on research and evidence, it is actually very helpful in parenting and working with parents and their children. Saying that, one of the common models that they use in CBT and CBFT is ABC model. So to refresh your memory, ABC model was developed by Dr. Albert Ellis, and A refers to activating event, B refers to the belief that we have around something, and then C refers to consequence, right? So for example, if I'm talking to my colleague and they don't respond back to me, that is activating events, right? And then belief could be my belief that says I don't matter or I'm not respectable, right? And then consequence of the activity after that event, and the belief that I have, the consequence would be I feel depressed or rejected, right? The feeling that I may experience. And then as a result of this chain, I could, just dismiss my colleague moving forward, right? So I just mentioned that because one of the important part of the process in CBFT is functional analysis. Function in CBT refers to the reason, right? The reason why a behavior happens. And in functional analysis, we want to analyze the reasons behind a chain of behavior or a chain of experience that we see in clients or in families, right? And for that, a lot of times, for that functional analysis, a lot of times what we use is ABC model. So we try to investigate and explore about activating event. We try to explore about the beliefs behind, the experience, and also, the consequence. So that means we need to ask different questions from client or clients when we are working with them. So for example, in functional analysis, we ask clients about activating event, right? What happened? How often does it happen? When it happens, what is the context of the behavior? What is the context of the situation? What are some of the behaviors that are, aligned or that they happen alongside of that behavior, right? Who is involving in that situation? So for example, if you're talking about a tantrum in a child, right? So how often does it happen? When it happens, what happened before, and then the family would tell us that, yeah, whenever the parents, we are fighting, then our child just starts crying and he doesn't stop, blah blah blah. So the kind of the behavior that is alongside with what we are seeing is the fights between the parents, right? Kind of like the reason, that one of the reasons that this tantrum was started. And then we ask if there's anyone who is involved in this situation. So for example, when this child starts crying, are the other siblings, are they joining the child? Are they protecting him, right? So all these different questions. Then after that, we go and we investigate about the thoughts. What are some of the thoughts that they occur to you when when these behaviors they are happening, right? So kind of we help the client, ask the client to identify a corresponding thought that happens whenever that trigger occurs, right? And if they can, if the clients or the family, they cannot identify a thought, we can skip this step. But if they are responding, if they are collaborative, and if they are able to think about it, we always ask that question. And then after that, we go and ask questions about the behavior, right? So then we and clients, we try to identify the behavior that comes directly as a result of that trigger and thought, right? So whenever this happens, then the mom goes and hugs the child, and they give them, I don't know, chocolate, whatever, and this is a behavior that is a result of this previous behavior. And then we talk about the consequence, right? So finally, the therapists and clients, they talk about the consequence of the behavior. What happens as a result of this behavior change, right? Because when the whole in the whole therapy session, when the therapist and the client, they can talk about the consequence, and when the consequence is determined, then the analysis is looked at as a whole. So, and it's easier to decide which part of the chain are maybe like perpetuating the maladaptive behavior, which part of the chain is something that we want to change, which part of the chain is dysfunctional, right? Which part of it is functional. When that part of the chain is changed, then the rest of the behavioral chain should be fine and should change in response. The other thing that happens in the process of CBFT is the therapist would investigate for family core beliefs and cognition type. Family core beliefs, they can come from the culture, some of the beliefs or narratives that we had heard in our families, as a child. So they can be in us in many different ways, but some examples of core beliefs could be mind reading, overgeneralization, right? And actually, I see a lot of them when I work with couples. The other thing that we want to explore and investigate is cognition type. For example, selective perception, right? And selective perception is when I don't see the whole picture, I just choose to see one part of that. So if my husband doesn't help me with cleaning the house, I see that, but I don't see him when he is helping me with my with parenting, or with this other thing. So I choose to see that he's not helping me with cleaning the house, and as the result, he's not a good partner. He doesn't love me, right? So one important thing is that all these different things that we are talking about, the ABC model, functional analysis, family core beliefs, we can practice, examine, and consider them in an individual and also in a family. Even like with the ABC model, we can consider it like more relational and use our systemic perspective in using them when we are working with a family, right? Or even like individual. So for example, activating event could be something that is about one individual, and then asking about the belief around that in other person, right? So making it interpersonal and relational when we are working with clients. Therapists who use CBFT ask clients to have commitment in therapy, in having those changes, and in doing even like the assignments that you are giving them or anything like that. So that commitment part or component is a part of goals in therapy. The other part is that the goals that they set, and a lot of times the therapists, they set the goals for the clients based on the assessment and what they see in a session. Those goals need to be agreeable. So in other words, clients, therapists, they use their authority and they use their power to identify the goals that are agreeable to all the family members in a session, and they should have the commitment, and they should agree to all the goals that therapists mention. And then the last thing is, usually the goals in therapy, they are mostly behavioral and they are measurable. So let's say if a couple says, hey, we're here because we have all these fights, blah, 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 then at the end of the day, the therapist would say, okay, you're having fights 5 days a week, 5 days a week, and then our goal would be, having fights 1 day per week, right? So measurable and behavioral. The same thing for family, the same thing for individual. There are different interventions and techniques that therapists with CBFT they use. A lot of them, they use the principles of classical and operant conditioning, and you probably remember the definition of classical and operant conditioning, but I'm just going to refresh your memory by saying that one of the differences between classical and operant conditioning is that in classical conditioning, the behavior is already there, right? If you remember the example of the dog and salivation, so whenever the dog sees the food, salivations is going to be there, right? We're just going to add something to this chain. But in operant conditioning, it's about rewarding with small steps. So once a set of skills has been mastered, the bar is raised for which behavior will be reinforced, right? Then we have all these different types and forms of reinforcement and punishment in CBFT. A lot of times we use them, or they use it for parenting, but we also, I think, we use them in our just human relationships in general. Maybe it's not as obvious as parenting, but we use them a lot. So positive reinforcement or reward is about rewarding desired behaviors by adding something desirable to it, right? Like a treat. Negative reinforcement is about rewarding desired behaviors by removing something undesirable. For example, I don't know, relaxing the curfew, or not eating the vegetables on your plate, something like that. Positive punishment is about reducing undesirable behavior by adding something undesirable, right? So and negative punishment is about reducing undesirable behavior by removing something desirable, for example, grounding, right? So punishment, as it sounds, it's always about undesirable behavior, and reinforcement it's about desired behavior. Then we have encouragement and compliments. Again, like a lot of times people, they use this for parenting, but honestly, in couples, in families, I think that in human relationships, just having that affirmation and seeing kind of like the half of the glass which is full and mentioning that, it's usually helpful more than we think. And a lot of times, by the time that couples, families, they are in therapy with us, they already forgot about this part. Token economies is about earning points. So it's usually for children and even like teenagers, like early teenagers. It's the same thing, the same star reward system, right? So if you do this, like you're getting, 1 star for this, and you see that a lot of times in classrooms. Quid pro quo, it's about behavioral exchange, right? So if you do this, I'm going to do that. Again, like a lot of times parents, they use this, but I think indirectly and unconsciously sometimes couples, they do this as well. And I think if they do it a lot, more than they should, then we see some challenges in the dynamic of the family and the relationship. The next intervention is about communication training, which can happen in many different forms and shapes. One of them is just psychoeducation, and then the other one could be like the homework or the task that you give clients, or the confrontation that sometimes people, they have with the clients. But actually, I'm going to talk about one example based on Gottman method for you in the next slide. I wanted to bring one example of communication training here, and this example, as you see here, is based on Gottman method. So I actually do this a lot in working with couples. I work with couples based on Gottman method. So I do this a lot with a lot of them because most of the time when they are in therapy, it's the point that they have a lot of arguments, a lot of conflicts, a lot of fights over and over and over, and they are using a lot of these patterns. So I work with them and I have this communication training for them, and I'm going actually to practice it here with you all in a way as if like there was a couple in front of me and I was working with them. So let's go and start. 1, 2, 3. Thank you for being here today, and I really appreciate that you are willing to listen to this, communication training. This part, I know that I'm going to talk for 5 or 10 minutes, and sometimes it's not the most fun thing to do in the world to listen to someone for 10 minutes, but I appreciate that you are willing to do that. I think that it's helpful for us to have this conversation because, as previously we talked about some of these communication patterns and, fights in your relationship. And I was wondering if we talk about, these 4 patterns that you see here, it might be helpful in terms of having the awareness about them and, knowing about their antidotes and, kind of like having reflection on them. So let's start and talk about them. So it's based on Gottman method. So Dr. John and Julie Gottman, they talked about these 4 horsemen in relationships and in communications. And they believe that when these 4 patterns, they exist in a relationship, in a communication, there's a rare chance that a conversation with these 4 patterns go to anywhere near close to positive, right? So a lot of times the results of conversations with these 4 patterns, it's not positive, it's negative, and it doesn't go anywhere. So let's see what they are. The first one is criticism, and criticism is about blaming the other person, right? So it has a lot of you statement. You did this, you are lazy, you are blah, 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 right? And so it's about the fact that you do not want to start a conversation in a gentle way, or you don't know how to start a conversation in a gentle way. So with criticism, when you start a conversation, you use a lot of you statement and you put the blame on your partner. Obviously, the antidote of that would be if you start a conversation in a gentle way. I usually tell my clients that you want to use a conversation with showing a white flag saying, hey, I'm here, I want to talk to you, I'm not looking for a fight, right? So you still have a chance to talk about the complaints that you have, but in a gentle way. A good question here is like, how, what are some of the practices that we can have, or, how we can have a gentle conversation? And that is a great question, but we get to it once we start, practice some of these things and we have different conversations and exercise for that. The next pattern, as you see here, is contempt. And contempt is really similar to criticism with a big difference. So in contempt, you still put the blame on your partner and you believe that you are better than your partner. You are smarter, you are more active, you know it, and your partner doesn't know it, right? So it's about superiority. So it's about that power dynamic also in a communication, that I know this, I understand this, and you don't understand it, you don't know it, right? The antidote to contempt is when you start a conversation, when you are having a conversation and you are describing yourself instead of describing your partner, right? So then you have a lot of sentences that start with I feel like this. When we were at that party and I was, eating XYZ, or I was, left alone in the corner of the party, I felt alone, right? Instead of saying, you're always like this and you never care about me and you always, leave me alone. Instead of that, using I statement. So the next one is defensiveness, and defensiveness is like when someone, put you in the corner of the room and, starts punching you. So usually when a conversation starts with criticism and contempt, you feel like you need to defend yourself, right? Because someone is just attacking you and your character, so you need to defend yourself. One tricky part of defensiveness is because of many reasons. Sometimes even like a conversation when it doesn't have any criticism or contempt, some people, they still go to that defensiveness mode, right? So they still get defensive, again, like because of various reasons, right? We can talk about it later. The opposite of defensiveness is taking responsibility, right? So if I'm talking to my husband and I'm using criticism or condemn, I'm accusing him of not taking care of the home probably when I was at home or when I was on vacation or whatever, right? So one way of, um, responding back to me for him would be, he also, uses criticism and contempt. He would say something like, "Oh my God, you are talking about taking care of a home. You don't remember what you did last time, right?" But taking responsibility would be something like this, that he would say, "Oh, you're right. When you came back home, I cleaned the whole house, but the kitchen was not clean the way that you wanted to be clean. So I'm really sorry for that. I should have, taken care of it." That would be responsibility and taking responsibility, right? The last pattern is stonewalling. And stonewalling is when you're talking with someone and it feels like there's this wall between you and that person. So you don't have any influence into that person, right? So when someone uses stonewalling, they draw this wall between them and the next person, and they are saying, "Hey, you know what? It doesn't matter whatever you're saying, whatever your behavior is, it doesn't matter because you don't have any influence on me. I'm not influenced by you," right? And a lot of times, based on research, men, they do this more than women. And one of the reasons that sometimes people, they do stonewalling is because of their previous experiences. They got hurt in a conversation, in an experience, and one of the ways that they realize that they can protect themselves from that hurt is like having this wall here and protecting themselves, this shield here and protecting themselves from the pain and the hurt, right? So because of that, the antidote of stonewalling is when you feel like you're flooded, you are getting really angry, you're getting to that boiling point, asking for time out, and give yourself at least 20 minutes. Do different things that help you with calming down, right? Like drinking a glass of water, meditation, listening to music, go for a walk, whatever, short sleep, nap, whatever that will help you with physiological self-soothing. And then after that, come back to the conversation. So I usually explain all that to my couples, to my clients, and then I would ask him, "Does that make sense? What do you think about it? What is your reflection on that, right? Which part of that resonates with you? Which part of that resonates with yourself and your partner the most?" So that was just an example of, communication training in CBFT. The other interventions include psychoeducation. And actually, psychoeducation is tricky because sometimes it's really, really helpful and clients really appreciate it. And sometimes, especially like if it gets too long or you don't ask clients if they are ready for that, if they want that, it can get really boring and it can impact the alliance that you have with the client. So I've worked with couples, and a lot of times I work with them based on Gottman method, which includes some of these psychoeducational pieces. And what I do, it's a way, not the way, but what I do is I usually tell them, like, give them a heads up that, hey, for the next 15 minutes or 10 minutes, I'm going to talk about a communication style, or this communication training, or the feedback session, whatever. And I know that I'm going to talk a lot, so I was wondering if that's okay with you, if you can stay with me, if kind of like asking them, making it more collaborative, and asking if they are ready. Other times, if like there is no way of going around it, or clients that are not ready for that, just keep it short. Keep it like just for 1 to 3 minutes, not more than that, because then the clients, they get bored and it's actually not effective. The next intervention is challenging irrational beliefs, and you can do that directly or indirectly, kind of like asking with direct questions or indirect questions. And the next one is guided discovery. And guided discovery is kind of like this journey that you and your clients, you go together, and you kind of like guide clients to discover the irrational beliefs that they have. One of my favorite questions that I usually ask my clients is that when they tell me a story or a belief, I ask them, if your friend, your best friend said that, what would you respond, right? And then usually the response that they have after they say it, like they realize that, yeah, this is, XYZ, this doesn't make sense, or, this is not how I think, this is the way that I think because I have this other thought. So it's a really nice way of doing this guided discovery. Um, the other intervention is thought records, and you can do that through journaling, asking for journaling. You can do that with individuals, but you can do that also with couples and family members, really, like asking all of them to do the same thing, and teaching them how they can do ABC. So, for example, realizing or exploring their, the activating event, the belief, and the consequence of that, and the chain of behavior. Just for the case, if it's helpful, sometimes I have clients who tell me, I'm not a fan of writing. I don't want to write. I don't want to journal. Then for thought records, I ask them to just record their voice and talk about this. You need to become, creative when you work with diverse population, and you need to really be attentive to your client's need. The last one is homework and task, and CBT and CBFT is really big in giving clients tasks and homeworks. And again, this is something that some clients, they really like. They like the structure, the homework, something that they can, stick with while they're not in therapy. And sometimes for some clients, this doesn't work because they do not want to feel like they're in a class or they're a student in a class in therapy. But homework and tasks in general, they are logical solutions to the problem that therapists with CBFT, they use in therapy. For all these different interventions and concepts that we talked about in this lecture, if you go to Dr. Diane Gayhart's book, you'll find many different questions, examples that are really amazing and awesome. It seems that there is not a lot of consideration for diversity and culture in CBT and CBFT. So we need to be really careful in using this approach with clients and families. We really need to be careful to not think that what we believe and what we think is the correct kind of like the story, or what they believe is necessarily irrational, or it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense because we don't know the client's context, we don't know their culture, background, and because of that, we really need to be careful in using CBT and CBFT. Also, we really need to be careful to not use CBT's educational components, in different cultures, again, like because we're not familiar with their dominant cultural values and the different beliefs that they have around power, or power dynamic in a situation. And thank you for watching and listening to this lecture.